Welcome back to Philosophy for Flourishing, the show where we explore principles and practices for living the happiest, most fulfilled life possible. Just as a reminder, our goal in this show is to build what I've been calling an operating system for flourishing, a personal operating system, basically just a set of principles and practices that we can rely on and recur to make decisions in our lives and to help us make our lives better. And for most of really for all of the episodes so far, we've focused on sort of self-development principles. Recently, we've started to dive into some things we can gain from Aristotle. And now I want to take another left-hand turn into the world of art. And let me just explain why we're doing this. So art, I mean, at the most basic level, the answer is this, that art can teach us all sorts of things about how to live better lives. Where else do we get to see a person's decisions and actions, their ideas, and the way that they act on those ideas play out over a long period of time and see how these things result? Now, art, of course, is not for this purpose. It's not primarily this didactic thing that is supposed to teach us. It's an end in itself. It's something that we turn to for enjoyment. But it does have this ability to convey to us moral ideas, principles, things that we can actually make use of in our lives. And I think we all are already on this premise. We all do this already to a large extent. We latch on to a great movie quote, and then we keep coming back to that and repeating it to ourselves and making decisions based on it and things like that. I mean, I've done this my entire life. Art has always just played this tremendous role in my life. And so I want to look at art a bit on this show, not only for those reasons, just also because I just love art. And so this is a good excuse to do that. And so we'll be doing that from time to time. And if this is something that you guys like, please let me know. Like, comment if you're on a platform that allows for commenting like YouTube or Facebook, or better yet, just email me at john@theobjectivestandard.com. Let me know if you like this sort of thing. We're actually thinking about making this a more regular thing, maybe even spinning it off into its own series and doing other shows, perhaps on a weekly basis, about art and its impact on our lives and what we can learn from it. So today, to sort of kick this conversation on art off, I want to talk about a show that I recently watched that I really, really enjoyed, called WandaVision. I'm sure you've heard of it. Hopefully you've watched it, because we're going to get into the plot and there are going to be some spoilers. So if you haven't watched it, maybe pause now or in the very near future so that you don't have too many things spoiled for you. And so WandaVision. And to discuss this, I have brought on my friend, my right-hand man at the Objective Standard and at Objective Standard Institute, Thomas Walker. Thomas, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here.
So Thomas recently wrote a review of WandaVision, and we discovered through this process that we had a lot of shared interests in art, and we had some similar ideas on this show, some conflicting ideas, and it just led to such great conversation that we thought, well, why don't we just do a show about this? This would be fun. It's fun for us, and hopefully it's fun for you guys too. So that's why we're here to talk about WandaVision today. And Thomas, I'm going to kick it over to you to give us a quick synopsis, a quick recap of the basic situation of the show.
Sure. So I'll reiterate again that in the course of going through the synopsis, I will go right through it and spoil some pretty major reveals that happen during the course of the show. So really, if you haven't seen it, pause now and watch the show and come back to this afterwards. But so this is a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So we start off with two characters, Wanda and Vision. That's where the title comes from. That we know from some of the previous movies in the series Avengers and all of the Avengers films. And but interestingly, Vision died at the end of the last one we saw him in Avengers Endgame. So we start off, these characters are a couple and find them bizarrely living in this kind of 1950s soap opera environment. It's a very strange place to start a series. But as I say, Vision, who had died, is alive and well. This is a completely different context, time period, everything in which we've seen them before. And this is a sitcom setting. People are laughing. There's recorded laughter, jokes, and everything. And but something's a bit off about the tone, despite that. And over the course of a few episodes, firstly, the setting changes. We seem to move through time from one episode to another, and more gets revealed that implies something more sinister is going on. And then, to cut a long story short, really, we eventually realize that what's actually happening is that we're in this fictional world that Wanda herself has created in the process of trying to get over her grief at Vision's death and really quite a lot of things that she's unhappy with about her life, but specifically about losing her lover, really. So she's created this entire fictional world. She's created a fictional version of her dead husband. And in the process of doing that, she's entrapped this entire town and coerced them into going along with her fantasy. So that's really the core part of the show is her way of dealing with her grief is to run away from it and hide in a fictional world and take over the lives of ordinary people in order to do that. So I think that gets us into sort of the thematic content of the show quite quickly.
Yeah, and if you're familiar with Marvel at all, then you know that we're talking about people with incredible superpowers, supernatural abilities, and Wanda's powers aren't totally clear. We know some things about her from previous Marvel installments. She grew up in a place called Sokovia. It's probably somewhere in Eastern Europe. We're not quite sure. It's a fictional place. And we learn a little bit more about her. And I think we've already learned some about her childhood prior to this series. We learned that Sokovia is the scene of this great battle between good and evil. And much of the place is wiped out, including, unfortunately, her parents. And so she and her brother sort of joined this experimental program with this really bad organization called Hydra. And we're sort of led to believe that she's been given these powers through this experimental process. But we know that she has these powers and they're not quite defined. We don't know exactly what they are, but we know that she's probably one of the most powerful Marvel characters out there. And she can do things with her mind. She can fly, she can move things. And so we don't really know the extent of what she can do, but we learn throughout this series that she's actually capable of creating what we learn is a hex, an actual spell in which she has made her own town called Westview, where things are just the way that she wants them. And really, as you hit upon, Thomas, one of the big subjects in this is grief and how one deals with grief. And I think we're in agreement that probably the key theme of this show is that you cannot live in the long run, you can't live a happy life by faking reality. And, this is really, really interesting because we think, philosopher Ayn Rand had this definition of art as a selective recreation of reality. And this show, ironically, is a recreation of reality. Like we're seeing through the director, Jack Schaefer's viewpoint, she's created this world in which Wanda has created this world in order to deal with her grief. And so, let's dive into this theme a bit. How does this play out and what are the consequences and what can we learn from it?
Yeah, so, throughout the show, really, there's quite a strong sense that she knows on some level that what she's living in isn't the real world. And there are outside agents who, penetrate this world at different points. And you also have, she's so successfully created her sort of copy of Vision down to such a detail that his moral compass comes into play and he starts to realize that things aren't right. So, she's helped along in that process, but all the time, there's a sense that this isn't real, that their relationship isn't real. That grates more and more. And then I think what's one of the sort of most harrowing things in the show is points at which Vision or other characters, enable the I should say that, she didn't create Westview. Westview is an existing town, but she sort of hijacked it and took it out of the world and turned it into this fictional world, and all the people in it. And there's moments where those people have the hex broken, and they suddenly realize, oh, I've not seen my children in weeks. What about my job? All this stuff, and she has to confront, in the last episode, she actually has to confront these people face up head on, and these people who've lost for at least 10 weeks, possibly more, of their lives, and disrupted in all sorts of ways, and suddenly there's a crowd of them just staring at her, and she has to face the consequences of what she's done directly, both for herself and for everyone else. But I think the message is in part that you have to running away from things isn't the answer, and hiding in fiction isn't the answer to problems in life. But it's also that you have to, whatever life throws you, not the hard things that life throws you and the hard start that you get in life are things that you have to accept and work with if you're going to succeed. So it's noteworthy, I think, that she chooses this 1950s sitcom setting for her fictional world, and we see in a flashback scene that when she was young, growing up in this war-torn country, they had these 1950s American soap operas on TV, and as a child she was like, I would love to live in that world, I don't want to live in my real life. And even as an adult, she hasn't built this advanced adult idea of what her life should be. She's just gone back to that and created that as her fantasy. So I think that you get this overall sense of, you've got to look at the real world around you, recognize the good and the bad in it, and build your life around that, not run away and hide from it.
Yeah, I want to comment because, this is brilliant writing. So just at the artistic level, I really, really respect this writing. So we find out that she and her family love watching these sitcoms, and anytime that she gets to pick, she chooses the Dick Van Dyke Show. She loves this. And so this is a really interesting, this is probably the most interesting premise ever created by Marvel, is, she's created this world and she's constantly changing the theme of this world that she's created or overtaken. Her version of it, at least, this hex that she's put on this town of Westview is evolving to mimic a different TV series within a different decade each week. And so we start in the 50s and we come up to basically present day. And so this is just really, really interesting, because it's not just, there's this cool idea, like Jack Schaefer apparently really loves and respects these different eras of TV sitcoms. And so she had the idea of integrating these different art forms into the writing, but she did it in a way that's really believable, because we get this character who loses her family while doing what she loves most, which is sitting down and watching the Dick Van Dyke Show. And so from there, we see what her motivation is. She has a real emotional tie to the series. It's sort of the thing that brings her back to the parents that she lost so young. And so she's motivated to, in her tremendous grief, she's motivated to recreate or to create this town based on these. And, I think that the take home point, if you watch the whole series, you see that ultimately this doesn't work. So you have one of the most powerful beings in the universe who attempts to evade reality, and ultimately reality catches up with her, and she can't go on doing this forever. So evasion doesn't work. And it reminds me of, the Serenity prayer. Grant me let me have the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So this is, a really powerful encapsulation of what I think WandaVision is all about. And then there's this secondary theme that you alluded to just now. And this is really, really interesting, because you don't see it pop up very much in anything in pop entertainment. This idea that I think goes to individual rights. So why don't I kick it over to you to talk a little bit, to unpack this theme a little bit?
Yeah, so I will sort of credit Marvel with having gone into this kind of theme once or twice before, not in such an overt way, but there are moments in the MCU where they do this quite well. The really standout one is in the 2012 Avengers movie where Loki attacks the German opera house, and there's one man who stands up in the crowd and said, "We've dealt with men like you before." This is a really strong moment.
That scene just makes my hair stand up on end. And then the other really good one, since we're mentioning these, is Captain America: Civil War, in which Iron Man and Captain America sort of go head to head, and Captain America really makes this excellent speech in defense of rights. So you're absolutely right. Marvel gets credit for going into this theme here and there. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but at the same time, there are other parts of the MCU which fly wide of the mark. But no, here it's so hit on the nose directly, particularly in the last episode, where she tries, as I say, the people of the town who have their real minds back, confront her directly, and she tries to reason with them and say, "Oh, well, you can be happy in my world. I'll make you happy." And there's this one man with the mustache who comes forward and says, "You can't make that decision for us." And it makes the point that although the world is objective and what should I say? The virtues are objective. That there is a good way and a bad way to act in the world, but what makes each of us happy and what's right for each of us to achieve our goals in our lives, no one else can really know. Those are only decisions that an individual can make, and this show almost verbatim makes that point exactly. Is only I can decide how to make me happy. You can't. However powerful she may be, whatever right she may think she has, or abilities she may think she has to fix everything to be right by her, that might not be right for everyone else. So it's not only that her decision is not really the best decision for achieving her own happiness, but she wantonly disregards the right of everyone else to make that decision for themselves as well.
Yeah, so this really goes to the principle of individual rights, and all the way back to the person I think best formulated the philosophy of individual rights, or at least in the 18th century, John Locke back in England, the guy who most impacted, most influenced the American founders. Benjamin Franklin called him the Isaac Newton of the microcosm. And Thomas Jefferson named him as one of the three greatest men who ever lived, the others being Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton. So no faint praise. This is a hero of people that you and I regard as heroes. And Locke taught that each person's life is his to live as he sees fit, and that no one should be able to interfere with anyone else's life. And you see this, like you said, it's front and center in this show. I mean, Wanda takes over these people's minds and their lives, and this is science fiction. One of the interesting things about it is, what if you could do this? Because in reality, you can't. I mean, no one can think with anyone else's mind or act with anyone else's body. It's just a fact of reality that we are individuals. And so one of us can't use another's body, and no one has a right to the product of another person's effort. These were the principles upon which America was founded. And you see, in a science fiction setting, what happens if somebody did have the power to think with another person's mind? Well, ultimately, it wouldn't really work. This person at points basically gets to come up for brief gasps of air and to think with their own mind again. And when they do, they realize that you've turned them into this sort of indentured servant in your own vision. And it reminds me of this great quote from Ayn Rand, where she's talking about various dictatorships and authoritarian governments, and the philosophy behind them, that certain people, certain elites should be empowered to do what they will with others in order to achieve what they think is the greatest good for the greatest number. And she wrote, "An attempt to achieve the good by force is like an attempt to provide a man with a picture gallery at the price of cutting out his eyes. Values cannot exist, cannot be valued outside the full context of a man's life, needs, goals, and knowledge. And this quote and this idea is so relevant today. I mean, it's kind of ironic that WandaVision came out when it did, because it certainly had to have been in production for several years and had been written long ago. But it was released a few months back, basically in the midst of this pandemic, in which governments have decided, elites have decided that they know best what's good for us, that they have the authority to shut down non-essential businesses, as if someone's right to create his own livelihood is not inalienable, as if he doesn't have this inalienable right, and to parse out things like healthcare, and now in this country at least vaccines. So the government has decided, well, we know better than the specialists in this field. We know better than the doctors whether or not non-essential services like certain cancer surgeries and things like that should be allowed. And so this is a grand scale example of this idea of cutting out a man's eyes in order to give him a picture gallery, an art gallery. People, in order to live well, I mean, just think about your own life. You have to make all sorts of decisions, and you have this range of values, this constellation of values, this network of things that you're trying to balance. And it's really complex. It's really hard to know what the best thing to do is. And, during a pandemic, the context changes for certain. I mean, there are new things that people rationally should take into consideration, but it doesn't change the fact that you need to be free to figure out how best to balance these different interests, these different values. And so you just can't live with your hands tied behind your back. And so, I mean, this show sort of echoes what's happening in the world right now. You see these people whose lives have been taken over, and somebody else has said, well, I know what's best for you. And in fact, she really doesn't even have that justification. She's not really trying to make them happy. She's trying to deal with her own grief. And in the end, I mean, it just culminates in this action sequence, but also this sort of philosophic debate. And, this is, again, one of the great points of this show is that it's a really thoughtful show. It brings in these philosophic themes that we can pull from, we can enjoy, and we get to see there in the concrete. I mean, so much of our lives, when we're thinking about justice or virtue and things of that nature, we're thinking in terms of these abstract principles. But, in art, in good art like this, we get to see there in the concrete a demonstration of these values brought down before us. And so it's a really, really great demonstration of both of these themes.
Yeah, and I wanted to make that point really at the start of when you were talking about, an individual has an identity. Individuals, we are all individuals, because this show makes that point in another way as well, in the same last episode. And this is also an example of how it's brilliantly getting people to think about moral themes in a way very little does these days. There's in the second last or last episode, Vision's real body is reanimated by scientists out in the real world and sent in with new programming to destroy Wanda. I think it's to destroy her, yeah. And, so we have Wanda's recreated Vision, the mind of Vision, his personality, his soul, essentially combating this, automaton with new programming in his body. And we get a philosophic debate between the two of them about which of them is the real one. And, not only do they have this really interesting conversation that, the resolution of which points to the fact that it's your values and your mind and your character that determine who you are. And they kind of fuse into the real Vision in the end. But not only that, but also that instead of, they have this, mild MCU style fight. And there was a lot of that in that last episode, which, irritated me a little bit. It's kind of what you expect in an MCU product. But instead of that fight deciding the outcome, they reason and figure out just by talking through philosophy, and they avoid needing to fight to answer that question, which is, the sort of 1980s Star Trek way of solving a problem. But nowadays in TV, usually everything is just resolved through conflict. And it was quite nice to see, they just stop fighting and talk it through and resolve it that way. And really, I think most of the conflicts actually get resolved in that way as well. The one between, Wanda and Agnes as well is the same thing. They end up just standing across the street talking to each other.
Yeah, this goes to I think the essence of Vision's character. And, you put it in conversation before that Vision is the moral conscience of the show. And it's really interestingly illustrated here that, and this isn't the first time that we see Vision resolving a conflict instead of by force, but by persuasion. Another just fantastic thing about this show. I think it happens at like maybe the end of Age of Ultron or something, but I could be misremembering. I've watched the entire MCU catalog in chronological order as the events happen, but it's been some time, of course, because that's a lot of storylines to keep in mind, and it takes a while to get through. But yeah, so Vision being the moral conscience of the show, it just makes perfect sense that then you have these two versions of him that have this philosophic debate. They're talking about a ship, and Vision asks if every board of the ship has been at some point replaced and nothing of the original exists, is it still that ship? And so, what it goes to, what is the essence of a person? And I think this is one of the things that the show, doesn't resolve totally satisfactorily. I love the writing nonetheless. I mean, this is highly intellectual writing for an action series. But, neither of them come to the conclusion that the essence of a person is that person's soul, in which case the Vision that Wanda created is the real Vision. But, if they had come to that conclusion, then unfortunately the real Vision would have been destroyed by this, recreated in a lab Vision. And so we wouldn't have this beautiful conclusion to the story that we got.
They sort of frustratingly agree that both of them are the real one, but the actual events that transpires, you still end up with the character of the one we know and love winning through. I've seen all of the MCU films as well, but I cannot remember discrete things from that canon. There's just so much of it. But I think it's worth, you talk about the writing, and we sort of go off the philosophic things for a moment, just to note just how well made this show is. And, the writing in terms of the suspense and the way that the situation is seeded through those early episodes is really, really well done. And I think it's really noteworthy that this show is slow and artistic, and it takes its time getting where it's going. And it takes a lot of time to really focus on just producing a really well-made product and recreating these sitcoms in such beautiful detail. And I've spoken to fans of some of these shows that it recreated, and I was somewhat familiar with Malcolm in the Middle and other shows that it referenced already, and just the amount of artistry and precision that went into doing that well, and the fact it just it's such a bizarre premise that a casual viewer might watch the first episode and think, what the hell is this? And give up 20 minutes in. But they clearly didn't care about people who do that, because, it makes you stick it out for 3 episodes before it really starts telling you what's actually going on. But I think it's, it's a notable exception to the rule at the moment that, you can't watch it with a short attention span. It requires this patience and willingness to work things out and have it revealed to you sort of step by step. I think that's really noteworthy about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they sort of treated this like another Marvel movie, in that although it's 10 episodes, the budget was something like $200 million, which is just incredible. I think it was the most expensive TV show ever made. So a lot of thought, a lot of time, a lot of production, but then it's not as if they just poured the entire all of their preparation into, let's get some really great CGI and make some really cool fight scenes. actually really thought about, okay, let's put this character in a moral dilemma. And it's another thing that I think we should talk about briefly is, at least the way that the conflict is revealed, it, at least early on in the series, Wanda seems to be a very sympathetic character, and we can understand, okay, she's been through hell and back, and it's not, it's not unfathomable. We understand her motivations for doing what we ultimately conclude is wrong, but there's something there. It's her attempting in her grief to latch on to the last of her values and to recreate them to whatever extent that she can. And ultimately, she does it in a really immoral way. And this isn't really dealt with at any length in the show. Perhaps we'll get another season in which it is. It's, things are sort of hanging in midair, which is right where the writers want us. They want us like tantalized and coming back for more later. But, Wanda almost at times seems to be unaware. In fact, in the first episodes, you think that the conflict is really flipped, that somebody else is using her and that she is the one who's being utilized for somebody else's evil ends. And then only in time do you find out, well, she created this world. And it's not even totally clear, like, to what extent she's taken in by her own creation and unable to see the difference between fact and fiction. It's really, that line gets really blurry, and perhaps it's blurry for her too. We're not totally clear. So, you have to, at least in my opinion, and that's one thing I wanted to say at the outset here, is that, these are our opinions. These are my opinions, Thomas's opinions. We don't claim to be authorities on art or anything like that. And, the conversation like this is intended for fun and, to pull whatever life lessons we can from it, not to tell you what you think you should think about these particular works of art. But, here, at least in my interpretation, Wanda, is a somewhat sympathetic character. And it's just really interesting how they're able to unload the events on you in such a way that you can feel for her to some extent.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's in the first 3 episodes, really, before you realize what she's doing, when you do think it's somebody else doing it. At the end, we sort of pull out and see the events we've been seeing on a monitor, and we just hear this voice saying, "Who's doing this to you, Wanda?" And the just spine-tingling sense of suspense that you have in those early episodes is so well crafted.
Yes, excellent. So, I mean, in total, I think our summary is that, WandaVision shows us that you really can't achieve happiness except by accepting reality and working with the facts. One of those facts being that we're individuals and we all have sovereignty over our own minds and our own bodies, and no one has any right to take over someone else's mind or body. And of course, that's something that we can only really talk about in a science fiction context, but it's just a really interesting, it's a really interesting illustration of a fact that does hold true in outside of fiction, which is that each of us has a right to our own lives. And so, great show, great fun discussing it. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Thomas. And if you guys are enjoying this and you're finding it helpful for building your own operating system for flourishing, I hope you'll subscribe, give us a review. I mean, these things seem really small, but they really do go a long way. And if you like this sort of direction in particular, please let me know at john@theobjectivestandard.com. Until next time, keep living your life and happy flourishing.